Why Infosys, TCS, and Wipro took different paths, same opportunity, different minds. In business, we often assume that companies operating in the same industry are essentially playing the same game. They face the same customers, respond to the same market forces, and compete for the same opportunities, which makes it tempting to believe that their outcomes are primarily determined by execution, who did it better, who moved faster, or who scaled more efficiently. But sometimes that assumption hides a deeper reality. Because there are situations where companies begin in what appears to be the same environment, respond to the same opportunity, and yet end up taking completely different paths, not because of execution differences alone, but because they were never actually playing the same game to begin with. The Indian IT industry offers one of the clearest examples of this phenomenon. At the center of this story are three companies: Tata Consultancy Services, Infosys, and Wipro. All three emerged as major players in global technology services. All three expanded during the same broad time period. And all three benefited from a powerful macro shift that changed the economics of software development across the world. And yet, when you look at them today, they do not look like variations of the same company. They look like entirely different strategic expressions, which raises a question that is more important than any comparison of revenues or market share. How can companies that share the same opportunity end up building such different identities? And the answer begins by breaking a very common misconception, because these companies were never as similar as they appear. To understand why, you have to go back to the moment when the opportunity itself began to emerge. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the global technology landscape was undergoing a structural shift. Companies in developed markets were increasingly dependent on software, but the cost of building and maintaining that software was rising rapidly. At the same time, advances in communication technology made it possible to deliver services across geographies in ways that were not previously feasible. India, with its growing pool of engineering talent and relatively lower cost structures, was uniquely positioned to benefit from this shift. Suddenly, a new model became viable. Companies in the United States and Europe could outsource software development, maintenance, and support to Indian firms, reducing costs while maintaining quality. From the outside, this looked like a single opportunity, a large, expanding market waiting to be captured. And in theory, any capable company operating in India at the time could have pursued it. But this is where the first layer of complexity appears. Because opportunities do not exist in isolation, they interact with the capabilities, constraints, and histories of the companies that pursue them. And that means the same opportunity can look very different depending on who is looking at it. For Tata Consultancy Services, the opportunity was not something it had to discover or validate from scratch. It was something it could organize around. As part of the larger Tata ecosystem, TCS inherited a set of structural advantages that shaped how it approached growth from the very beginning. It had access to institutional capital, it operated within a framework of governance that emphasized long-term stability, and it benefited from a level of trust. This context reduced uncertainty. TCS did not need to prove its legitimacy in the same way a startup would. It did not need to optimize for survival in the short term. Instead, it could focus on building systems that would allow it to scale over time. And this is exactly what it did. Rather than chasing rapid expansion across multiple fronts, TCS concentrated on developing process excellence, building delivery frameworks, and establishing relationships with large enterprise clients who valued reliability over experimentation. At first glance, this approach may appear conservative, but it created a powerful advantage. Because in the world of enterprise technology services, predictability is often more valuable than innovation. Clients are not always looking for the most creative solution. They are looking for the solution that will work consistently, at scale, without unexpected failures. And by aligning itself with this need, TCS positioned itself as a company that could be trusted to deliver. Over time, this focus on execution and scale became its defining characteristic. Now contrast this with Infosys, which entered the same opportunity from a completely different position. Infosys did not begin with the backing of a large industrial group. It did not have access to abundant capital. And it did not inherit institutional trust. Instead, it started as a small, founder-driven company trying to establish itself. This created a different set of priorities. Where TCS could afford to focus on building systems, Infosys had to focus on building trust. Because in the early days of outsourcing, global clients were not just evaluating cost advantages, they were evaluating risk. Could they rely on a company thousands of miles away? Would that company adhere to global standards of governance and transparency? Infosys understood that answering these questions convincingly was essential to winning business, and so it made a strategic choice. It invested heavily in corporate governance, financial transparency, and process discipline, not as secondary considerations, but as core elements of its identity. This decision shaped how the company operated internally and how it presented itself externally. It became known for doing so in a way that aligned with global expectations. Over time, this positioning allowed Infosys to build strong relationships with international clients, establishing itself as a trusted partner. Now consider Wipro, whose entry into the IT industry did not follow either of these paths. Unlike TCS, it did not emerge from an institutional technology framework. Unlike Infosys, it did not start as a pure technology company. It came from manufacturing, which at first glance might seem like a disadvantage, because manufacturing and technology services require very different capabilities. But in reality, this difference created a unique form of flexibility. Wipro was not constrained by a fixed identity within the IT sector. Its move into technology was not a sudden pivot. It was a continuation of this pattern. Its move into technology was not a sudden pivot. It was a continuation of this pattern. This meant that Wipro's approach to IT was inherently different. It did not aim to dominate immediately. It aimed to learn, to experiment, and to build gradually. This slower, more adaptive approach allowed it to navigate the transition from manufacturing to technology without destabilizing the organization. At this point, what begins to emerge is not just a difference in strategy, but a difference in mindset. Tata Consultancy Services approached the opportunity as a system to be scaled. Infosys approached it as a credibility gap to be solved. Wipro approached it as a new domain to be learned. These are not minor variations. They are fundamentally different interpretations. And those interpretations shaped every major decision that followed. As the industry matured, these strategic differences became more visible. TCS continued to expand its operations, deepening its relationships with large clients. Its strength lay in its ability to deliver consistently across complex, large-scale projects, making it a preferred partner for organizations seeking stability. Infosys, meanwhile, continued to refine its processes and strengthen its reputation for governance. It positioned itself as a company that could meet global standards not just in output, but in conduct. Wipro, on the other hand, maintained a more diversified and adaptive approach. Its journey involved periods of experimentation and shifts in focus. This made its trajectory less linear, but also allowed it to develop capabilities that were not limited to a single model. However, these differences also introduce trade-offs, because every strategic choice creates both advantages and limitations. The emphasis on scale and execution that defined TCS also meant that it was less focused on rapid innovation. The systems that enabled consistency could make it more difficult to move quickly. For Infosys, the focus on governance and process created trust, but also introduced structure that could slow down decision-making. Disciplined standards can also reduce agility. And for Wipro, the emphasis on adaptability and reinvention came at the cost of a sharply defined identity. It did not always achieve the same level of clarity in its positioning. These trade-offs are not weaknesses. They are the natural consequences of strategic alignment. When a company chooses what to prioritize, it also implicitly chooses what to deprioritize. This brings us to the present, because the environment that shaped the rise of these companies is changing once again. The industry is entering a new phase, driven by technologies such as artificial intelligence, automation, and cloud computing. Once again, companies are faced with a familiar question. How do you respond to a shift that has the potential to redefine your industry? And once again, the answer is unlikely to be uniform, because each company will approach this new opportunity through the lens of its existing strategy. Tata Consultancy Services may leverage its scale and execution capabilities to integrate new technologies into its existing systems. Infosys may focus on maintaining trust and reliability as it adopts new tools and processes. Wipro may draw on its history of adaptation to explore new directions. The specifics will evolve, but the underlying patterns will remain. And this leads to the most important insight in this entire story. When we look at companies in the present, we tend to focus on their outcomes, their size, their market position, their reputation. But these outcomes are not random. They are the result of decisions made years, sometimes decades earlier. Decisions that were shaped by context, by constraints. Which means that by the time we see the result, the strategy has already been set in motion. So the next time you look at companies operating in the same industry and wonder why they look so different, consider this. They may not be playing the same game at all. Because strategy is not just about what you do, it is about how you see the opportunity. And once that perspective is set, everything else follows. Learning BizCraft, where we decode how strategy is shaped long before success becomes visible.